In tonight's video, I will be telling 6 stories. What really lurks in the fog? How bad can a camping trip really get? How does one hack reality? All of these questions and more will be answered tonight. A huge thank you to the incredible writers who allowed me to share these stories with all of you. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. Also, if you didn't notice already, this video is an hour long. You guys were pretty vocal about how much you liked them on the last video. So as long as these keep getting that kind of support, I'll keep making them. And of course, I'd like to say thank you for all of the incredible support. I was pretty blown away, but I'll stop ruining the immersion now. If you enjoyed the video, likes and comments are always appreciated, as it lets me know that I'm doing a good job. Subscribing if you're new is as well. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I live in a small town in Montana. Most towns there are small to begin with. My family were major farmers that had their own 50-acre property up in the mountains. We also had 3 cats and 7 dogs. I was pretty spoiled when I was younger. My brother and myself would walk down a dusty 2-mile trail down to our farm, where there were animals that included pigs, cows, chickens, geese, and much more. We grew apple trees, peach trees, pears, peas, carrots, and corn. Once we arrived to the farm, we would start our daily chores in the relentless heat that burned the back of our necks. Some of our chores consisted of planting new seeds, caring for the animals, milking the cows, pulling weeds out of the dirt, and watering some nearby flowers. By 5 o'clock, we would be done with our chores, and at 6, supper was ready. When my brothers and I walked in, we were always greeted by the fresh new smell of steak, cooked carrots, and freshly baked rolls. The rolls were my family's very favorite meal. My mom was always delighted to make them for us, and never failed to impress us with not only the taste, but with looks and the smell. My mother was a small lady. She was 5'6" with brown hair, and beautiful hazel eyes. My father always said her eyes twinkled in the dark. She always wore some kind of dress with animals or flowers on it. My dad was a bigger guy. Him being a farmer all of his life, he had some serious muscle gain, and even his shadow scared me for how big he was. He was bald, and it always appeared shiny. The sun sometimes reflected off him so much that it blinded me if I looked at it for too long. He wore a cowboy hat in public. He had a mix of green and hazel in his eyes. If you met him, the first impression you would get from him is that he was strict and mean, but in reality, he was not very strict at all, and was extremely caring and nice, but he was very protective. I remember while I was growing up that I always would strive to be like him in any way I could. My brothers made fun of me because they thought I was a suck-up, but really I just loved my father and looked up to him quite a bit. I had 3 other brothers. John was the oldest. He had short red hair and was like a giant, at least to me. He wore a camouflage cap all the time, and I got concerned if he ever washed it. I kid you not. You knew he was coming because you could smell the sweat from his hat from 50 feet away. He had darker brown eyes than the rest of us, and as older brothers are, he was very bossy and commanding. Daniel was the second oldest. He was just about as tall as John, and they were only 2 years apart in age. He had green eyes, blonde hair, and was skinnier than most of us. Anthony was the youngest. He had a squeaky voice kind of like Arliss from Old Yeller. He was shorter than the rest of us, but surprisingly strong. He had most of our mom's features, but he had our dad's otherworldly strength. Then you have me, the second youngest of the bunch. I had a balance of both my parents' features and personality. My dad said I had the heart of a warrior, and my mom said I had the looks of an angel. Our cats were always out and about, and would come around for their breakfast and dinner. Our dogs were the ones that always went down with us for our work. Most of the time they would stay out of the way, but sometimes they would see something move in the bushes, and run across the field digging up plants, and it would get on our nerves. Our dad would be working out in the trees cutting them down for wood. For the most part, our family was, I guess to put it simply, normal. There was only one thing I thought was always strange about my family. My family hated the fog, or rather, what they thought lay in the mysterious mist. This was the only thing that was more important than hard work. If we knew the fog was coming, we were instructed to drop everything we were doing now, no matter what. and hurry back to our home and wait out the fog. I always despised the idea for so many reasons, but the main one was that I could almost be done with a project, and then I would have to quit just because of some clouds. I would ask my brothers why we had to leave work, and they would say that I should just do as I'm told and not ask any questions. I never received any sort of answer to this until I was 16 years old. The past few days were stormy and cloudy, so it made work harder and more difficult than usual. Mud filled the fields and caused major trouble for us trying to get through to the animals. The winds were so bad that it blew some of the newly planted crops out of the ground. My brothers and I were furious of all the extra hours we had to put in because of a pathetic storm. My dad wasn't so fond of the idea either. We spent hours working non-stop, and we were all tired and exhausted, and we were getting fed up, so we all decided to take a trip to town for some drinks and food. My mouth watered at the thought of a nice cold Mountain Dew with some freshly cooked chicken tenders. Once we got to town, we picked up some drinks and some delicious snacks from a gas station closest to us. Once we got back up to the house, my parents were inside on the couch. My mother and father had looked very disappointed and angry. "Mom, Dad, are you okay?" I asked while putting my cold soda on the kitchen counter. "Where have you boys been? We've been worried sick. Fog is supposed to roll in at any minute." My father snapped at myself and my brothers. My brothers all apologized immediately like they were being programmed to do so on command, right then and there. I remained silent. I was getting furious with my parents, and I was exhausted and burned out by everything we had been doing the past few days, so I snapped back at them. "Why do we always have to go inside for clouds that are lower than usual? I want some answers, and I want them now." I shouted while staring sharply into my dad's eyes. My dad started to make up excuses to cut off the conversation by dismissing us. I quickly cut him off track. "No, don't ignore my questions. I think I deserve answers," I called out. I could hear the rage in my vocals as I spoke. My dad stared me down, then spoke in almost a whisper. "Boys, go to your rooms. Your brother and I need to have a talk," he said while looking me directly in the eyes. My heart sank because I thought I was going to get it from my dad. My brothers solemnly walked to their rooms, while I stood by the kitchen counter in silence. I looked out the front windows before my mother drew the curtains over them. It was getting really foggy, and it was dense too. I could only vividly see the gates in our front yard. I'm not gonna lie, it did make me a little uneasy. My parents motioned me over to have a seat on the couch. I sat down and put my hands on my lap and waited for one of them to speak. Finally, my dad started to talk. "Son, you are right to be angry with us, and we do owe you answers and our apologies," my father explained. "Listen to your father, okay?" My mother pleaded. I looked at her as she said this, and she had an expression of fear and worry in her eyes. I turned my full attention back to my father. Once he took notice I was listening, he started to speak again. "Your grandfather and grandmother were hard workers just like us, but they also feared the fog. I wanted to know why they did the things they did just like you. One day I got my answer." I was a little taken by what he was saying, because it wasn't just us who kept away from the fog. Sweat trickled down my back as I listened with more intent. "The reason you have never met your grandparents from my side is because they were taken with the fog. I don't know what took them, but they were gone." My eyes widened as I saw my father was tearing up. I had never seen him like this before, but I held my breath and let him continue. Then the thought did cross my mind. I always seemed to wonder why we never saw my dad's parents. I just thought that they lived somewhere far away in a different state, not fog taking them somewhere unknown. I gave my father a look of disbelief, and he took notice. "I know how it sounds, but it's true. I have never lied to you, have I?" He questioned me. My father was many things, but a liar was not one of them. "I know, Dad, I believe you," I stammered. We left it at that, and I headed towards my room when I was stopped by my mother. She looked at me with a soft smile, and with a whisper, she told me I was the only one that Dad had told about the fog. My tongue was tied and I didn't know what to say, so I gave her a hug and went to my room. It wasn't until last night that I found out what lurked inside the mist. I am now 29 years old, and all my brothers moved out in their own place, but I decided to move close to my parents' property. I had my own remote house in the woods, with plenty of land to do whatever I wanted. As always, I stayed indoors when the fog came, but last night was different. I was walking back to my house from watering some plants a little way down my dirt trail when I noticed that there might be some fog, so I picked up my pace a little. I still had time before it arrived, so I should be safe. I had a flashlight with me just in case. I worked too late in the evening and couldn't see. They did happen from time to time, so it always came in handy. The air was getting colder, and the sweat on my body was dripping all over my head. About halfway up the trail, I heard a voice. It was faint, but it sounded like it was distressed. I called out to it, but I got nothing in return. Thinking I must have just been working hard and was tired, I just brushed it off as some kind of hallucination. As I continued, I noticed I was getting lightheaded and dizzy. It wasn't long before I stumbled over and hit my head on what seemed to be a rock. It was mere seconds before I blacked out, but I saw something walking around me. It was hard to tell what it was, but soon it was all darkness. I woke up with an enormous headache, and my head pounded against my skull. I tried to look around me, but I was surrounded by mist. It took a while to fully understand the dire situation I was in. My head still felt like it was going to crack, but I had to get back to the house. My legs wobbled and felt weak with every step I took, my body wanting to throw up, and I knew instantly I was dehydrated and I needed water fast. Disoriented, I kept going with a steady pace. It wasn't long before I heard them. A mixture of young and old voices surrounding me like some kind of messed up choir. Each step I took, the voices got closer. Pretty soon the voices turned into high-pitched screams. They rang in my ears and eventually rang in my head, and it only made my condition worse. Not long, I could see my house in the near distance, and with all my strength I ran back to the house with the scream still continuing. I was right in front of the gate, and I touched it with my sweaty fingers, but something stopped me. The scream stopped, and it was just silent. No birds, crickets, and even trees swaying in the wind. My eyes darted quickly in every direction to make sure I was alone. I turned around to the gate, and that is when I heard an earth-shattering horn. It shook the ground on which I stood upon, almost knocking me off my feet. I sat on the ground thinking of what I could do. My mind raced and it felt like my heart was going to pop out of my chest. I sat there with my arms cradling my legs when the horn ceased. Not even 5 minutes later, I looked up and saw hundreds upon hundreds of black figures, ranging from 5 to at least 60 years old. They all gave off a menacing vibe that haunts me. They all spoke in unison and chanted some unknown language I had never heard before. They all started to near me with each passing second. At this point, I would like to say I ran, but I didn't. At least not until I saw all the eyes. Their eyes haunt me as I type this out. They looked like they had gone mad. Their eyes were bloodshot, pupils blackened and their eyelids wide open. Still chanting, they neared closer and closer. Finally, my brain took a fight or a flight response, and I ran. I hopped over the fence into my yard, and when I got to my front door, I looked back one more time. They were all in front of the gate. I don't know how they were visible through the mist, but they were. I quickly slammed open the door and shut it and locked it. I could still hear their chanting in the background. I cradled myself on the floor until I fell asleep. Now here we are today. I'm writing this from a hotel because service sucks in the mountains, and I don't plan on going back up there. I am selling the property to a guy from Utah that goes by the name Hudson. I would tell him and warn him of the dangerous, but he would never believe me. If you go up to Montana, never stay in the fog. I have no doubt in my mind that those are the things that took my grandparents, and I don't want you or anyone else to be their next victim. Before I start, I want to say first that I'm not what anyone would call a superstitious person. Not to say that I'm closed-minded or anything, at least I don't think so. So much as I've noticed that if you leave your mind open enough, your brains are liable to fall right out. So when you see what I'm about to tell all of you, I was told this was a community that tended to be less skeptical of strangeness. Y'all might understand why I've had so much trouble wrapping my head around what happened. That's the question I keep asking myself over and over. What happened? I can't explain it, no matter which way I look at it. And I've tried to, believe me. I've spent the past few nights unable to sleep, driving myself up the damn wall trying to put a name, an explanation to what happened. During the summer I like to get outdoors every chance I get, be it swimming, hiking, or camping. You're apt to find me somewhere outside more often than not. Last week, for example, I was out camping. Not in any official campgrounds, though where I live there are plenty to be found. That time around, I was itching for something with a bit more solitude, and a friend of mine had mentioned a lake they'd been to with good fishing. Safe to say I was immediately interested. Do some fishing, maybe even catch something to cook up later in the evening. It sounded like a pretty good time. Trouble was, when I finally had time to get out that way, I couldn't find the lake. I don't know if I misremembered the instructions my friend gave, or if maybe he's just really bad at directions. But either way, I wound up in a foresty area with no lake in sight. It was a beautiful forest though, and even had this perfect blend to set up my tent. What was more interesting though, was the rock formation I found. Well, I called a formation, but it had obviously been set there. A fair long while ago too, if I'm any judge. It was this circle of stones, a perfect circle of them, and just a few steps beyond the circle was a large stone. I'd say 3 feet high maybe, and around 2 feet wide. It was dipped slightly in the center, almost looking like it was just waiting for someone to sit down on it. Y'all probably can guess what happened next, right? Of course I sat on it. Who wouldn't? It was just so weird, and kind of funny at the time to find it there. Just waiting for a butt to introduce itself. So I plunked myself right down, and almost immediately felt uncomfortable. I'm not talking like it was an uncomfy seat for my fragile derriere. No, when I say uncomfortable, I mean I felt like I was a kid caught with their hand in the cookie jar, you know? Like I'd just done something very, very naughty, and the adults had looked in at just the right time to see it. There was no reason for me to feel that way though, and being my stubborn self, I tried to ignore it. Sat there a few seconds longer, even just to be spiteful to the odd sensation, before hopping right back up. Not because I was suddenly creeped out, of course. No, nothing like that at all, or so I told myself. But because I had a tent that needed setting up, and right there, just a few feet from these stones was the perfect spot. After I had my tent set up and my things stowed away, I set about fixing myself a nice dinner of roasted hot dogs. It wasn't fish, but they were still tasty, and the smell of them roasting was mouth-watering. The only thing that really marred it was this odd smell. Pungent is a good word for it. Almost sweet, sort of, but also rotten. I hadn't seen anything earlier, but nature is metal and things die all the time. What puzzled me though was the way the scent seemed to travel. I know that sentence makes no sense. I know. But when I say that I mean, say one moment it would be coming from the east, but then a few moments later, it'd be coming from the north. Sometimes it smelled stronger, sometimes fainter, and always it seemed to be coming from different areas. I brushed that riddle off as nothing more than a trick of the breeze, even though there hadn't really been any kind of breeze that evening, and continued on with my night and my meal, with that smell wafting up and growing stronger and fainter throughout it. It goes without saying that eating supper was a bit less than pleasant that night. I turned in early that night. I wanted to explore the area in the morning, see what I could discover while I was in the area, but I didn't get to sleep immediately. It was too quiet, you see. Not like I'm a city girl and this lack of sirens is spooking me. I just mean silence. There weren't any crickets, owls, nothing was making a sound, and it was more than a bit unnerving. Eventually, I got to sleep. I guess it must have been around 1 or 2 in the morning. Instead of a good night's rest, what I got was some of the freakiest, most vivid nightmares I've ever had the misfortune of experiencing. They were like a parade of weird and horrible, and while I can't recall them all, one of them was seared into my brain. I doubt I'll ever manage to forget it. In the dream, I was standing outside my tent, close to those odd stones. I say I was, but it was more like I was a different person, an observer, I guess. Anyway, I was standing there just staring at my tent until movement within the circle of stones caught my eye. There were 3 women standing there. I don't think they'd been there before, but in the dream it didn't seem terribly important. They weren't there, and now they were, and that was just as it should be somehow. Those 3 women, though, they stood in a line. On the left was a woman that can only really be described as a crone. Beyond ancient, wrinkles on her wrinkles, and hunched over from age. On the right was a woman that was more middle-aged. Not really young anymore, but not quite old yet either. And right in the middle between them was a young woman, right in the first flush of youth. It was the young woman that had my attention in the dream, not because she was some overwhelming beauty or whatever, but because she was very obviously very pregnant. Also, she was holding a hatchet. I know that seems like something I probably should have stated first, but again, in the dream that was just oddly unimportant. As I watched them, it was the crone that spoke up first, uttering a single, but very harsh, no, that seemed to reverberate in my mind, and left me with a feeling like I should be ashamed of something. The second to speak was the middle-aged woman who, just like her elderly counterpart, spoke only that single no, this time leaving me feeling like I should apologize, beg forgiveness for things I didn't even understand. It was when that middle woman spoke, her blank eyes staring into mine as she spoke too, echoing that single no each of them had uttered, hatchet in her hand lifting. When she spoke, however, it wasn't shame or contriteness I felt, or should have felt. It was fear, a bone-deep fear that left me cold, in that abstract and disconnected way I felt in the dream. It was when the last echo of their single spoken word faded that the hatchet came down, not on me, or on the two women. No, she brought it right down on her belly. There wasn't any blood, and this seemed somehow reasonable in the dream. Just the sound of flesh being hacked away with each swing she brought down against herself, and the sight of dark, empty space peeking out from within the split flesh. After several swings, I'm not certain how many, the woman dropped the hatchet to the ground. That seemed to signal the old woman to action, as she turned to face the young woman and shoved her hands into the gaping hole that she'd hacked into her belly, and pulled out something. I don't know how to describe it, or explain it. It should have been a baby, but the thing that was pulled out of that woman was the farthest thing from human. Its skin seemed to ripple, and almost surge along its tiny frame to the old woman's hands while she held it, caressing her fingers in little waves of flesh. Staring at it hurt, watching the way its skin crawled and crept hurt. Catching sight of the eyes that seemed to blink in and out of existence along its body hurt, and hearing it speak was agony. That was when I woke up, nose bleeding, ears bleeding, and my body shaking like I was having a seizure. It was light outside and the sun was out and I was freezing. From the inside out, everything felt like ice, like I'd never be warm again. When I was finally able to move, I packed up my stuff. I left the tent. There were things scratched into the canvas of the tent. Faint, but there, and so painful to watch when they squiggled and morphed with each blink of the eye. That was last week. There have been moments when I'm thinking about what happened, trying to understand what happened, when I feel that aching cold sink back into my bones, when my nose, my ears begin to bleed again. I don't understand what happened, but I'm starting to think I should stop trying. It happened a few months after my boyfriend Kevin, our friend Ron, and I moved into an apartment together. To this day, for the life of me, I have no idea what it was, or what it wanted. What would have happened if things went differently? That thought scares me. Sorry, let me tell you what happened. Then you can give me your opinion. We had been renting the apartment for close to a year now. We being Kevin, my boyfriend, our friend Ron, and of course myself. The apartment wasn't anything special, just your average 2-bedroom with 1-bath apartment. There was a coat closet to the right of the entrance, and the living room was right when you walked in. The back of the living room connected with the kitchen/dining area, and to the right of the living room next to the coat closet was a hallway. Down the hallway to the left was the bathroom, and the right was Kevin and my room. Well, at the end of the hallway was Ron's room. Funny enough, I remember there being no light for the living room. The main light source was the hallway light. Anyway, I worked graveyard shifts for a gas station, while Kevin and Ron worked the afternoons. We rarely had the same days off, so half the time I had the apartment to myself. One day after my shift, I came home exhausted and went straight to bed, thanking God that it was my day off. Kevin was sound asleep already, so it was nice cuddle time for me. By the time I woke up, the sun was starting to set, so our room was dark. but I could still see Kevin sleeping next to me. I knew it was a day off for him and Ron, so I figured they may have just drank too much, and he really just needed to sleep it off. Not wanting to disturb him, I went to the living room to watch TV. I didn't turn on the hallway light though. We had sent the living room up with chairs instead of sofas. The TV was in the corner next to the entrance, so there would be no glare on the screen. The chair I sat in was closest to the hallway, so I could see into it out of the corner of my eye. About 15 minutes into the show, which was some ghost show, I heard the door to Kevin and mine's bedroom open. I look over to see his shadow standing just at the edge of the hallway and living room. The light of the TV didn't really reach the hallway, so I could only make out his outline in the darkness. "Hey babe, sorry, did I wake you?" I asked, turning down the volume. "I had a terrible dream. I feel like I'm still trapped in it. Come to bed with me, please?" "Sit next to me, we can talk about it. Or you can watch this with me and take your mind off it." I patted the chair next to me. I didn't want to go back to bed, since there was a possibility I would fall asleep, and I wanted to spend time with him. Hear what he had to say if he wanted to talk about his dream. "There was fire, and so much smoke. I feel like I can't breathe. Honey, come to bed with me, please. I need to know you're okay." He sounded frightened. "Kevin, it's okay. Come here and we'll talk about it." I still didn't get up. "You don't understand. We had kids. The fire, the smoke. I couldn't get you. You kept calling out to me. Come to bed with me, please. I need to hold you, to feel you. I need to know I didn't... Calm down, it's okay. It was just a dream, I'm right here." He was starting to scare me at this point. I never heard him sound so scared, so desperate. "No, you don't get it. I tried to reach you. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Come to bed with me, please. I need to know that I didn't let you die." At that moment I stood up, to comfort him. God, that nightmare had really gotten to him. I was just about to start walking, when the front door opened. Ron and Kevin walked in with groceries in hand. What was I talking to? What would have happened if I had went to bed with it? When I was a kid, there was this little chant we would sing about the yellow man. You could usually spot him fishing on the bank of the river. He always sat a bit away from where most people set up towels and chairs. He was tall and thin, with a distended stomach that hung low and spilled over his tatted jean shorts, and his skin was yellow. He sits by the water. He wants to eat your daughter. He fishes in the river. He wants to cook your liver. The yellow man, runs faster than you think he can. Our parents said that he was sick and we shouldn't make fun of him or be afraid of him. But the hue of his skin and his aversion to the rest of the people in town weren't his only eccentricities. Some of the older boys would ride their bikes real close to where the yellow man would sit. One boy swore that the yellow man had a bucket full of dirty water he would dip a cup into and drink from. Another boy said that the bucket was full of newts. Maybe eating the newts is what turns him yellow. My friend Mallory commented once. "Like a flamingo?" I asked. "Not a lot of bright yellow newts wandering around," Amir countered. "My dad says the yellow man is sick," I said. "I was yellow when I was born. Something about my liver, I think." "That's gross, Mel," Amir said, and I told him to stop being a jerk, because I secretly thought Mallory was pretty. We talked about the yellow man a lot that last summer together, because it was really hot, and there wasn't anything to do except spend time by the river. One day Amir even ventured close to the yellow man, who was sitting shirtless in a dirty white plastic lawn chair. He was wearing a faded red baseball cap. Amir kicked a soccer ball casually closer and closer, while we watched with apprehension. When he came back, he reported, to us and anyone else that would listen, that the yellow man smelled like dead fish and 100% sweaty ass, and that what they said about the bucket was true. He also said that the yellow man looked right at him, and his eyes were bright blue. Amir's stepmom heard from some other moms that Amir had been bothering the yellow man. He was grounded for a week, and he told Mallory that his stepmom had hit him. This didn't sit well with Mel, because while I thought she was really pretty, Mel thought that Amir had the sunrise and set, even if he was kind of an ass sometimes. Mel snuck over to the house in the middle of the night. My parents are heavy sleepers, so I didn't have to do much sneaking to go outside. We sat on a bench in my mom's garden to talk. Mel was already several steps ahead of me in some conspiracy. I've talked to everyone. Did you know that 5 years ago a boy went missing? He left school and no one saw him again. But someone said they found bones and clothes in the woods. But when the cops went to check, all the evidence was gone. I didn't know that. It's true. And the cops think that it was the yellow man, and he ate that kid. No way, I said. Everyone knows the chant. He's going to eat your liver. And 10 years ago, a bunch of animals were found cut up with their organs taken out. I actually had heard about that. I think every town around the world has a similar mystery. Animals turn up dead with little to no explanation. Usually it stays a mystery, or it turns out to be the work of other animals. But I didn't say any of this. I just nodded. The thing is, Scott, what if the yellow man is a murderer, or a cannibal, and Amir was so brave to get that close to him, and he got punished for it? Parents should believe their kids about someone who could be dangerous. We have to do something about it. Amir wasn't grounded anymore, but he was sulking and didn't come to the river one day. Mel wasn't there yet either. I went over to some of the older boys. They were sitting near their bikes, and one was showing the others a Zippo lighter with a flaming skull decal. "Scotty," Bo called out to me. "Hey, what do you think about the yellow man?" I asked, indicating with a vague hand gesture to the yellow man spot on the beach. He wasn't there at the moment. "He sits by the water. He wants to eat your daughter." Two of them chanted in unison. The boy with the Zippo, Felix, shrugged then said, "I think he eats people." "He fishes in the river," another boy chanted. "He wants to cook your liver. The yellow man," all the boys shouted. Felix grabbed my arm, hard, and yanked me down into the sand. "Runs faster than you think he can," he stage whispered. The boys erupted in laughter. I yanked my arm back and stood up. "What evidence is there?" "What?" Felix asked. "Evidence. Proof. All I can tell is he's a weird-looking guy that no one has ever talked to." "He drinks newts," David said in a voice that let me know I was the idiot here. "That's just weird and gross. Nothing about that says he's a crazy cannibal or a psycho killer or..." I was cut off when one of the boys said, "Tell him, Felix." Felix sighed dramatically, but he had an apprehensive look. "Tell him," his friends urged. I heard my dad talking to the basketball coach after school last year. I went to go listen because I thought he was trying to get me to join the team for college or whatever. So I was listening to them talk, but they were talking about this cop. He's the brother of the coach, and he had gotten a call about a peeping Tom that left a handprint on some lady's window. They couldn't match the print to anything, but the lady said it was the yellow man, so they looked back in really old cases and found the same prints and the same kind of stories. People saying it was the yellow man, but this is the only one recently. And then my dad said, "Wish we could get that guy for something. He gives me the creeps." And the coach said, "The cops won't do anything, not until someone turns up dead." I told Mel and Amir everything Felix told me. Amir said he didn't care, but Mel seemed to be on fire with a nervous energy. "We're going to get this guy." "Get him for what?" Amir asked with a laugh. "Everything. I mean, he's either a people-eating psycho or a creepy peeping Tom, and neither of those are good." I mused. "Okay," Amir said. "Then you two go get him." So we did. Mallory and I sat on a hill near the river, and waited until everyone was gone except for the yellow man. When it got dark, he pulled his shirt over his head and grabbed his chair, bucket and pole, and started a slow, loping walk along the water. We followed. He made his way along a worn dirt path to the back end of a mobile home park. His trailer was behind a line of trees, away from the others. We watched, hidden in the brush, while he put the bucket down by the ramshackle porch and leaned his pole against the railing. He went up the stairs and into the trailer. We waited a few minutes. It was getting darker, but we could still see well enough. I made the first move and walked, slowly, low to the ground, towards the bucket. I looked in and saw muddy water and a dirty styrofoam cup. I reached in and picked up the cup and tilted it towards me to see the contents. A fat black newt stared back at me. "Gross," Mel whispered over my shoulder. I gently poured the cup out onto the ground, and the newt plopped out with a wet sound. Mel took the cup from me and dipped it back in the bucket, but nothing else alive was in there. I gestured to the back of the trailer, and we made our way around. A light was on in one of the rooms, but a curtain was drawn so we couldn't see in. Mel pointed to another window. There wasn't a light on, but there weren't any blinds or a curtain. She peered in and shook her head. I took her place, and I couldn't see anything either. I pressed my palm against the window, and thought about how creepy it would be to see the yellow man staring at me from the outside. Mel made a sound behind me, and I turned to look. The yellow man was standing right next to her, one hand holding a fistful of Mel's hair, the other around her left wrist. He was naked. His stomach hung low to his thighs. I could see his ribs. I could see his bright, blue eyes. He held on to Mel and took a few steps back, towards the front of the trailer. I silently followed. The yellow man's long fingers were covered in dirt. His fingernails were black. He stopped at the foot of the porch steps. "Pick it up." The yellow man's voice was a harsh whisper. He was looking down at the discarded styrofoam cup. I obliged. "Dip it in the water." I bent down and filled the cup with the brown water. Mel had started to whimper. "Drink it." The yellow man croaked. "What?" I said. "Drink it." The yellow man yanked harder on Mel's hair, and she made a squeaking sound. "The newt's gone," I said stupidly. He snarled at me. His teeth were white. I threw the cup at his face and started to run down the hill. I heard Mel yell, and suddenly, she was in front of me. I stopped short, lost my balance, then fell to my knees. The yellow man loomed over me, Mel's hair still in his hand. In his other, he held the cup. "Drink the water, Scotty," he hissed at me. I did. I woke up by the river. A cop was shaking me awake. My parents had been looking for me. I was badly dehydrated, so they took me to the hospital for fluids. I didn't say anything about the yellow man, but I asked my dad where Mel was, and he said that she was probably at home. I was in the hospital for 2 days, then at home, grounded until school started. Mel wasn't at school. Amir hadn't heard from her either. I talked to Felix and Bo at school. I told them Mel and I had gone to the yellow man's house, and he'd grabbed her, and that I didn't remember anything else. Rumors started to fly that Mel and I had confronted the yellow man, that I'd fought him but he was too strong, and he took Mel to kill and eat. Another rumor was that Mel had lured me to the yellow man, and he'd taken my liver, Temple of Doom style, as they both ate it. Mel was considered to be a runaway. Amir told me that Mel had told him some things about her home life that weren't too pretty. To the cops, this must have been enough reason to not go looking for her. The stories in the chant about the yellow man still circulated. People said they saw him by the river most days. I didn't go to verify this. In my senior year of high school, I heard a new version of the chant. He sits by the water. He wants to eat your daughter. He watches you at night. His teeth are long and white. The yellow man, he'll cook your brain in a frying pan. Amir and I grew up. We went to college, moved out of town. Time went by, as it does. Amir messaged me recently, saying he had helped his dad move out of his old house to another town. He told me that there were several missing persons posters up, and he's asked a kid he saw at a gas station about them. The kid shrugged at first, but when Amir brought up the yellow man, the kid leaned in near Amir's ear dramatically, and in a hushed voice, said that everyone knew the yellow man had taken them and eaten them, but because he ate every bit, even the bones, there was never any evidence left to find. He's learned, the kid said, that he couldn't leave bones because a human leg bone had been found a year ago, and he was afraid he'd be caught if the police ever identified it and linked it back to him. Amir told me all of this with amusement. "Isn't that crazy, Scott? A person goes missing in a small town, and it's always the boogeyman that did it. It's never, oh, they had a bad life and they ran off, like Mel did." "Yeah, crazy," I said. "The kid told me that the yellow man still hangs out by the river every once in a while. Said that one time, a kid hit a baseball too close, and the yellow man caught it without even looking up. Apparently he's got ninja-like reflexes now too." "Crazy," I repeated, as I looked at my calendar to see if I had the next few days free to make a road trip. I'm at my old house, visiting my parents. An overdue visit. We usually just talk on the phone. It's a nice summer day. Sunny and hot. Some scattered clouds and a light breeze. A good day to go fishing. I think I'll take a walk to the water. Maybe I'll see a familiar face. Maybe I'll be brave enough to finally get some answers. This year has been a rough ride for me so far. I got out of a 3-year relationship last September, and work has been very hard to focus on. Before anyone suggests this, I am talking to someone. And yes, a professional. After a lot of weed usage, many talks with my counselor, and some more legitimate medication, this summer was supposed to be my time to start pulling myself out of the hole. So I rented this house. New place, new life, new me, you know? It was a nice enough place, 1,000 square feet, 1 bed, 1.5 baths. It even had a lawn that I could see myself mowing throughout the summer months. The landlord gave me a tour before the lease was signed and finalized. The bedroom was a little small, but I was looking for a lot of open space. I just wanted my little piece of the world, and this seemed like it could be it. At least for the 12-month lease agreement. There was only one weird thing about my meager home to be. I wanted to ask more questions when it came up during the tour, but I really didn't want to scrutinize a good thing. I'm afraid I made a large mistake. Murray McDonald was a bigger, middle-aged man with a round face, but weathered hands that he tucked into the back pockets of his jeans. Each time our tour took a little pause for me to survey the rooms. Our conversation through most of the half an hour or so I was there that day was a little more than eager questions being met with grunts to the affirmative, or negative serving as answers. Each time we came to a new spot to inspect, Murray would turn to me, hands in his big pockets, and raise his dark eyebrows, etching several furrows in his forehead as he did so. It was a tired look that let me know just how happy the man was to be answering my questions. But I asked nonetheless. I have a questioning nature. My ex said so anyways. This process was played out in the living room, the bedroom, and both bathrooms. It was simple enough. Nothing was out of the ordinary, and I was feeling excited to move in. Then we came to the kitchen, and Murray's demeanor changed entirely. As he walked in, he moved quickly past me down the narrow lane between the stove and the sink, and leaned his back against the wall on the far side of the room. It was the fastest I had seen him move since the tour began. I'll be honest and tell you it spooked me a little bit, but I shook it off, reaching for the thrilled feeling I'd been reveling in. The kitchen was definitely workable. It wasn't built for a team to cook in or anything, but once again, it would just be me. Everything was as clean as could be expected, and all the fixtures seemed to be in order. Satisfied, I turned with a smile to look at Murray, still leaning against the far wall. He wasn't looking at me. There were no raised eyebrows or lines of annoyance on his face. His eyes were wide and staring down at the tiled floor of the kitchen. His arms were crossed over his chest, and I spied a thin line of sweat running down his temple. The change from weary landlord to this alarmed state he seemed to be in now froze me where I stood. I stayed still and quiet for a moment that stretched over the interior of the little house, like mist settling over the world. The moment passed, and I swallowed with a little effort and spoke at last. "Murray?" He jumped at the sound, his wide eyes locking with mine. The intensity in that stare made me stumble back a step. At that, Murray seemed to remember why we were here, shook his head a little, and stood up a little straighter before he spoke. "Sorry about that," he grumbled. Lost in a thought for a moment there, I guess. "No worries." I laughed shakily. Happens to me all the time. Not terribly convinced, I was ready to head out and leave this strange man to get lost in whatever thoughts he wanted to. I just wanted to get everything for the house settled and move forward. "Well, this all looks perfect," I said with a thin smile. "Anything else I should know about the place before I get moved in?" At this, Murray's face dropped a little. He took off his well-worn baseball cap and ran a hand through a thinning patch of dark hair beneath. Returning his gaze to me, Murray stepped away from the wall for the first time since we'd entered the kitchen, and I could finally see that it wasn't a wall he was standing in front of. It was a door. There wasn't anything special about its appearance. It was a simple, white door. The doors in the rest of the house looked exactly the same as this one. In my mind, I thought this meant I had more closet space than I thought, or maybe even a full pantry. feeling some of the excitement I'd carried with me through the beginning of the tour. I turned back to Murray, who was watching me closely from beside the door. Then he spoke in a calm, friendly voice very unlike the tone he'd favored during the rest of our short conversations. "Well, technically there's one more room in the house, the basement," he said with a small nod to the door he had been leaning against. Before I could respond or react, Murray barreled on. "But I've been using the space as storage for a lot of my own crap through the years. The door stays locked, and the only key is mine. I hope you aren't offended, but I just don't want you messing around down there in all the old junk. I haven't kept it real organized, and I worry someone else might stumble and hurt themselves. You understand?" It seemed like a reasonable explanation, but my lizard brain was abuzz with the instinct to run from the house. Thoughts of crazy landlords keeping tenants as sex slaves in their secret basement dungeons played out in my mind. My poker face being crap, Murray must have seen the worry on my face. With a convincing laugh, he put his hands up in the air like he was surrendering himself. "I know what you're thinking. Who is this guy and what awful thing is going on in his basement that he doesn't want me to know about?" We both laughed a little. I didn't feel much like laughing, but it cut the tension a bit. He continued on. "I swear it's nothing like that. We can take a look if you want." He took his keys out of his back pocket and selected the necessary key. Again, he looked at me with raised eyebrows and furrowed brow, waiting for a response. After a second of hesitation, and a few more murder scenarios playing in my brain, I blinked and answered the man, "Why not?" The basement was very much just a basement. A concrete floor with shelves and boxes galore. Murray hadn't lied about the abundance of junk down there. He had to climb over several piles of it to reach the solitary light bulb that hung from the ceiling at the center of the room. Satisfied, I told Murray we could head back up. Back in the kitchen, Murray closed and locked the door once again, returning his key to his pocket. Turning to me, he spoke again with the nonchalance and dismissal. "See, nothing crazy at all. Just a lot of stuff someone could trip over. So do me a favor, huh? Don't worry about getting in here. Not without me." Looking to end what was starting to feel like a very strange encounter, I nodded quickly. This apparently wouldn't suffice. Murray spoke again with harshness in his voice. "I need you to say it. You will not try to go down there without me. You will leave it be." I stared at him for a moment, not exactly trying to hide the puzzlement on my face. He raised his eyebrows at me again, but the tiredness in his eyes had been replaced with clear focus now. My blood turned to ice in that gaze. I eagerly answered, "Of course, I'll stay in my areas up here. I promise not to mess with the basement at all without you here." Murray held his cold gaze on me for another swollen moment, before apparently deciding that my answer was acceptable. The tour was completed, and I hastily left the house, trying to focus on how good it would be to have my own place and a fresh start. All the while, that icy stare the older man had held me in made me jittery the entire drive home. Later that week, the papers were finalized, and I had my keys. Gathering up some friends, I got moved in with relative ease, and all was right with the world. My buddies stayed over for a while once we were done to enjoy a well-deserved feast of pizza and beer. It was such a relief to just hang out and be happy in my new home, filling it up with warmth and light. As it got later, my friends began to head for home one by one. When the last one had left, I locked the front door, turned and rested my back against it. I looked up at the house and smiled wide. "It's gonna be good," I said out loud to myself and the house. I turned towards my bedroom to hit the hay myself. 3 loud knocks came from somewhere in the house. Knock, knock, knock. Frozen in place, I perked my ears, half convinced I had imagined the sound. The silence stretched out forever, and a quiet ringing bloomed in my ears. I let out my breath, trying to replace my sense of calm with oxygen. I began to move towards my room again. Knock, knock, knock. I whipped around. My heartbeat hammered in my ears like an echo of the knocking sound. This time, it was clear where the noise was coming from. The kitchen. Painfully aware of each sound I made, I inched my way back down the hall, through the living room, and into the kitchen. I flipped the light switch and was greeted by that ominous white door on the side of the room. It was sitting there waiting for me like it had invited me in for some coffee. In that moment, I couldn't make my feet move forward anymore, and I just stared at the door waiting for another knocking noise to come, and my sanity to go. I counted the seconds, then the minutes. 5 minutes went by with me standing stock still in my own kitchen, staring at the locked basement door. After 10 minutes, I was convinced I'd had a few too many, and was content to end the night with a few more, in a night of drunken sleep. Laughing a little, I reached in the fridge and grabbed a couple more beers. I walked back to the kitchen entrance, and looked back at the basement door. It still looked like it was waiting for me there. I shook the thought off, and flipped the light switch off. A thin line of yellow light was leaking through the crack at the bottom of the basement door. I stared at it. There was no way it was real. Or maybe Murray had left the light on, but I hadn't seen the light before I hit the kitchen light switch walking in. It couldn't have been real. That's what I kept thinking. Reaching up, I hit the kitchen light switch again, and there was the basement door, stark white and almost smiling at me. Did you see? Are you sure you saw what you saw? Come a little closer. Take another look. My hand was shaking on the light switch now, and I could feel my eyes bulging in their sockets. Slowly I took a deep breath and let out a little shudder. I would turn the lights off and there would be nothing. It was fine. I was fine. With a click, the kitchen lights went dark once more. What I saw then sent me scrambling back down the hall into my room, and I did not leave until the sun had returned the following morning. The yellow light still seeped out from under the door, broken only by the unmistakable shadow of 2 feet. Knock, knock, knock. I used to be a reality hacker, and no, it's not what you think. I don't have some kind of supernatural or metaphysical powers. I just exploited real life the way a hacker would exploit electronics or computer systems. Just like a computer hacker wanders the dark web in search of information or restricted corporate systems, I would traverse the city looking for shortcuts through infrastructure, or in search of things no one else knew about. I don't really like the term though. Even if the parallel I just explained makes sense, I just don't understand why they have to call it something stupid like reality hacking. I prefer suburban spelunking, myself. I think the comparison to actual spelunking is more accurate, and it's a fun word to say. My best friend AJ and I would explore all the little nooks, corners, and crannies most people don't even know exist. Drains, abandoned buildings, closed subway tunnels. We hacked things like that. We bent or broke the rules for curiosity's sake, and our own amusement. Do you remember that old bootlegger's hideout that was discovered last year in the city subway system? AJ and I found it while exploring an old tunnel. Of course we didn't get credit for the find. We couldn't. We weren't supposed to be there in the first place, and sure as hell weren't going to let any authorities know that we did. Instead, I told my buddy Jerry, who works for the Public Works Department, about it. He ended up on the local news, and got some kind of award from the local historic association. We didn't mind. For us, the thrill was in the find. I remember when we first got into the place how excited we were. The place was really dusty, a clear sign that no one had been there for years and years. We found out something everyone forgot, or never knew existed in the first place. We never found anything like that again, but the rush of the unexplored, or the thrill of the unknown, kept me exploring all throughout high school and college. AJ and I spent the summer after our freshman year at the community college exploring the city's storm drains. We had a lot of fun doing it. If you don't mind a little humidity and the occasional bad smell, you could get across town without worrying about traffic or pedestrians. Sure, we could always drive like regular people. We both had cars, but traffic can get pretty bad in our city. A good shortcut could come in handy sometimes. One day in the middle of August, we went to a park across town for a pickup game of football. It was late in the afternoon, and traffic was bumper to bumper, so we took a shortcut through one of the drains on our way home. We made good time, and cut a few blocks out of our trip. To tell the truth, we were a little smug about our subterranean shortcut. Who else can get across town as quick as we could, without awkward hops over fences and through backyards? Most drains are either simple tubes that force you to hunch over as you walk, or they're larger corridor-like tunnels, with raised ledges for walking. The one we took was a tube. Normally I don't enjoy those, but this one was not very long, so I put up with it. The last rain was weeks ago, and the drain was pretty dry, making for an easy go of it. Our footsteps and banter echoed down the circular tunnel, and the cool underground air felt refreshing after the heat. Our route more or less ran a straight line that cut through a large hill. It connected to the main drain system at a single point near the entrance, by the park where we played football. So imagine my surprise when we ran across a fork in the drain we both could have sworn wasn't there last time. We stood there looking at it for a long time. Finally, AJ spoke. I didn't know this was here. Me neither, I said. How could we have missed this last time? Neither of us are fools. Whenever we explored, we always tried to find out as much as we could about where we went. Also, we always let people know where we were going. Research the location before physically checking it out, bringing plenty of lights, survival equipment, and stuff like that. Urban spelunking can get dangerous. That's why we didn't just charge headlong down the new tunnel. We did what we always did. We went home and investigated. After getting back to my place, we did some digging on the internet, but the tunnel wasn't on any of the city's maintenance maps, or in any public works record we could find. I called my friend Jerry from the city public works department, but he didn't seem to know about it.
No, there's no branching drain off that one,
Jerry said.
Are you sure you were where you thought you were?
Yeah, man, I'm sure. I'm telling you, there's another drain down there, I said.
Well, I'm off for the next couple days. Going fishing up north. You gonna check it out?
Probably this weekend, yeah, I answered.
Alright. I'll tell Bob you'll be down there just in case you get in trouble.
Jerry said, and after a few pleasantries, we hung up. Try as we might, neither AJ or I could find anything out about this tunnel, but we did figure out a few things. First, we were pretty sure it wasn't in use. The city had an older drain system that it no longer used, and we figured this new one was a part of it. We ventured a little way down the new route when we first found it, just to see if it was a tunnel or a room of some kind. AJ noticed that the connection was pretty rough, not smooth like a connecting tunnel. Most of the tube-style tunnels are modular, like PVC pipes. They don't cut the drain tubes to make a connection. They use prefab joints. The connection from the main drain seemed like it was cut, and then connected to the old one. Another thing that caught our attention was the lack of any kind of moisture. Most drains show at least a little evidence of dampness. Even just dried leaves or debris, but this one was dry. That confirmed for us that this drain was part of the old system, so we decided to explore it. Before we ventured down the tunnel, we took all our usual precautions and a few more. We brought materials to map the place, chem lights to mark intersections, a GPS, and we let some friends know what we were doing, and when we planned to come back. Sure, my backpack was heavier than usual, but better to play things safe, considering we planned to venture into an unknown tunnel. It didn't take long for us to get to the access points, and while we walked to the intersection with the new tunnel, I found myself getting excited. I kept thinking back to the bootlegger's hideout we found. Would we stumble upon something like that again? We might even be able to take credit for it this time. That would be something. I was lost in those thoughts, and didn't realize that AJ had stopped walking. I bumped into him and he swore. Dude, really? He asked in a feigned outrage. Sorry, man, I said, shrugging. Just be a little more careful when we go in, AJ said, pointing down the new tunnel. I was apparently so lost in thought that I didn't realize we had arrived. We stopped to check our gear and then made our way in. AJ went first and I followed. When we started walking, we kept count of the number of steps we took. We knew from experience how many feet 100 paces would take us, what orienteering enthusiasts call a pace count. That helped us construct a fairly accurate map. We knew where the new tunnel branched off from the old one, how many steps it took us to walk a certain section, and in which cardinal direction each turn led. We could even do the walking hunched over in a cramped space like this one, so even after a few twists and turns, we were still pretty confident of our location, despite having walked for about an hour. We decided to take a break and check our position, even though we felt pretty sure about our navigation skills. We were making a crude map based on our pace counts, and compared it to a city public works map. I guesstimated that we were near the slums, probably under Lake Street. We decided to check the first manhole we found to verify our position. I was also getting tired and a little sore from walking through the cramped space, and needed to stretch. To our great satisfaction, we popped up onto Lake Street. Lake and Union, to be exact. That was a little odd, not because we were lost. We were actually right on the money, but because according to the public works map, no access joints existed here. Still, we didn't question that, even if it seemed odd at the time. We were more surprised at what was on the street than a manhole that someone neglected mapping. Lake Street used to be nice a couple decades ago. Big houses lined either side, mostly run down and abandoned. These houses were close to a century old and dated back to the early days of the city, but gradually fell out of style as the years went on. Even in its dilapidated state, the neighborhood was still impressive. Most of the houses were at least 3 stories tall, in an old Victorian style. I would have felt nostalgic for simpler times, if the whole thing wasn't so unexpected. I remember the house right in front of the manhole from which we exited was particularly impressive. I knew that some big houses still stood on the streets, but this one was enormous. It was a 4-story monstrosity of an old-fashioned mansion. Most of the windows were boarded up, and the yard was overgrown, but it was clearly a nice place upon a time. The sun was getting low, and the late afternoon shadows obscured many of the house's details, but that also helped hide the blemishes of decay. "Dude," AJ said after a few moments. "I had no idea this was here." "Me neither," I replied. "I thought we knew about all the big houses around here." "Apparently not." AJ turned toward me. "Want to check it out?" "What? Now?" I said incredulously. "We don't even know if it's structurally sound." AJ gave me a look which people reserve only for valley girls, old ladies at church, and lame practical jokers. "I don't want to go inside, dum-dum," he laughed. "Let's just walk around outside and see if there's anything interesting." "Okay," I answered slowly. Walking around the outside couldn't hurt, I guess. I just wasn't sure why AJ wanted to leave an unexplored tunnel behind. As if reading my mind, he spoke again. "We spent most of summer underground, man. Let's enjoy some fresh air. We won't go inside, just walk the grounds and see if we can find out anything about it that way. We can always pick up the drains tomorrow." I thought for a few seconds. I didn't see any fault with his logic, and some fresh air did sound good. "Okay," I said. "I'm game. I just don't want to hang out here forever. It's almost dinner time and I'm pretty hungry." I patted my stomach to emphasize the point, and AJ laughed. "Yeah, me too. We can hit up a burger joint on the way back. Let's go." With that, we set off. Finding a way into the yard wasn't hard since the fence was broken in many places. We didn't even have to jump it. Walking through the tall grass wasn't easy though. I made a mental note to check myself for ticks when I got home. Circling around the house didn't get us much in the way of results though. The side was just as boarded up as the front. No discernible way in or out caught our eyes. Not until we made our way to the backyard, and suddenly the ground gave way beneath us. One moment we were walking through tall grass, and the next, our world dissolved into a torrent of dirt, broken wood, and gravity. Before we knew it, we found ourselves in some sort of cellar. We lay there in a daze for a minute or so, shocked by what happened. AJ groaned and sat up. I coughed and sputtered a bit. Apparently I got a mouthful of dirt on the way down. I guess I was too surprised to notice. "What the hell?" AJ asked. "You okay?" I said, sitting up myself. "I think so." He answered. AJ stood up and brushed himself off. "Nothing is broken." I looked up as we saw the hole through which we fell. It was pretty high above us, too high to reach. Broken plywood framed the edges of the hole. It was probably fairly rotten, and gave way as we put some pressure on it. "AJ, that's a long way up, man. I don't think we're getting back up that way," I said. AJ swore. "Yeah, I think you're right." I looked around, but I couldn't see much in the limited light from the ceiling. I took off my backpack, dug inside it for a few seconds, and pulled out my flashlight. I turned it on and shined it around the room. It seemed to be a cellar typical for a house as old as this one, albeit deeper than usual. I saw a door at one end. AJ saw it too. "Only one way out, huh?" he said. I nodded and got up. We checked our gear, grabbed an extra light, and walked over to the door. It didn't seem like it was locked when I tested the knob, but an inexplicable feeling of dread came over me when I touched it. My skin prickled goose flesh, which caused me to shudder and jerk back my hand. The door opened. We both jumped at that. I was pretty sure that I hadn't turned the knob, or even got my whole hand around it, but it opened anyways. We didn't lose our heads, despite the surprise of the suddenly openness for AJ and I. We moved to opposite sides of the door so that whatever had opened the door couldn't see us. Hello? I called after a few minutes. Is anyone there? Nothing but silence answered me. I looked at AJ and he shrugged. I frowned, but I didn't say anything. We moved in front of the door and shined our flashlights in. It looked like the perfect man cave from the late 80s. A pool table sat immediately in front of us, and on the opposite wall was a large screen TV. That would have been top of the line sometime around 1985. Posters of action movies like Die Hard, The Terminator, and Predator. Beckoned the wood-paneled walls along with some pro sports players like Larry Bird or Wayne Gretzky, and old swimsuit issues of Farrah Fawcett and Kathy Ireland. A couple cases of sports memorabilia stood against the left wall, interspersed with the images of late 20th century testosterone, and a bar was on the right side of the room. Dust covered everything, even the carpet. Dim light filtered through gaps in the boards covering the windows. We fanned out. AJ went to look at the display cases and I examined the pool table. Near the pool table was an autographed poster of the NFL player William Perry. I remembered the poster from when I was a kid, because my older brother had one on his wall. Perry, nicknamed the Fridge, was smiling and leaning against the refrigerator, but in this one his face was fixed into a snarl. His eyes seemed to be looking directly into mine, and I had the distinct impression that expression of hate was for me. I blinked and the Fridge was back to the smiling football player that I remembered, and not the hate-twisted visage I could have sworn was glaring at me a moment ago. I glanced over at AJ to see if he saw what I did, but he was crouched in front of a case of sports memorabilia. I gave the poster one more glance, and then made my way over to AJ. As I walked to the case, AJ straightened up and said out loud, "Dude, what the hell?" He turned to look at me, and pointed to the bottom shelf. I bent over to see what he was talking about. Right in the middle of the bottom shelf sat the strangest figurine I had ever seen. It was two people laying on the ground with their stomachs ripped open, and their entrails strewn about around them. The really weird part is that they looked exactly like us. "What the hell?" I said. "Yeah, man," AJ said. "This is really weird. How the hell did these get here? This makes no sense, dude." "We need to get out of here," AJ said. "Now." "Yeah," I said. "Let's go." We moved with more than a little urgency to the door, through which we came in, but out of shock it seemed to be locked. Again. Another door sat on the far side of the basement, and we made a beeline for it. AJ wrenched it open. We could see stairs leading up into the darkness. AJ stared up at the stairs and I started to follow. Before I even climbed one step, I felt something touch my hair. The touch was so light that I could have imagined it. In fact, I thought I did. Until I felt breathing on my neck and heard faint whispering words that I couldn't quite make out. I don't remember exactly what happened next, but I found myself at the top of the stairs. I must have sprinted up to the next floor so quickly that I didn't realize it. I could hear footsteps following me, and I thought I heard AJ call out, "Hey man!" I wrenched the door open, and then stopped dead. I was back in the basement, standing just inside the door we came through when we first entered the room. The only difference was that no light was coming through the windows now. The only illumination came from my flashlight. A sudden noise made me jump and drop my flashlight. The door behind me slammed shut. The flashlight rolled away from me towards the center of the room, throwing crazily spinning shadows all over the place. I moved forward to retrieve it, but a sudden motion made me freeze. Something was moving around outside the light. Scuffling sounds came from the other side of the pool table. I peered at the table, trying to make out the shape in the limited light. I was already on edge, and my fight-or-flight instinct was starting to kick into gear. Then, something grabbed my leg. I didn't wait to see what it was. I just bolted. No flashlight, no plan. Just getting the hell out. I reached the stairs and took them two at a time. I crashed through the door and found myself, thankfully, in another room. I looked around and saw that I was in some sort of space between a kitchen and living room. The kitchen was on my left, and the living room to my right. A large sliding door was on the wall in front of me, and a little bit of the evening light leaked through from where the boards that covered it didn't sit flush. Everything was covered with the same dust as the basement. Something was wrong, though. I couldn't put my finger on it, and then suddenly, it dawned on me. I could hear whispering. I didn't notice at first because my heart was racing, and I was breathing heavy, But now that I was starting to catch my breath, I could hear it. Faint whispers, like the ones I heard at the bottom of the stairs, seemed to be coming from the living room. I was already on edge, almost panicking, and that sent me over. I blindly rushed in the other direction, and saw AJ just ahead of me. He looked like he was leaving the kitchen through an archway on the far side of the room. I started following him and then jumped when I suddenly heard footsteps pounding up the stairs. I leapt through the archway, and came into some sort of living room or sitting room, dodging indistinct blobs in the dark. I tried to keep up with the dim shape of AJ ahead of me. The room was darker than the kitchen. I had to slow down to avoid crashing into something in the dark, even though the sound of footsteps behind me was getting louder. Even if it was a squatter or some crazy old resident who never left the place, every instinct I had told me that I did not want to meet whoever was behind me in this house. Illumination from streetlights suddenly filled the room. AJ had managed to wrench open an exterior door, and the light illuminated the room enough for me to see my way. He stood silhouetted against the bright frame of the door for a second, and then disappeared outside. I sprinted for the door, and did not stop until I was outside. I dashed across the large porch, to the steps and into the yard. AJ stood there, bent over and breathing heavy. "Holy shit, man," I said, panting. "That was close." "Yeah," he answered, his voice strangely flat. "Close." I was about to ask him if he was okay when a voice from behind me cut me off. "Dude, what the hell? Why didn't you wait for me?" I knew that voice. It was AJ's. But AJ stood in front of me, gasping for air after a mad dash out of the house, into which we accidentally fell. How could he be behind me? I turned to look, afraid of what I might see. My stomach sank and a cold feeling of dread settled over me as I saw what was behind me. It was AJ. He was walking down the steps with a concerned look on his face. "Dude," the second AJ said. "Who's that?" The first AJ stood up. They both looked at each other, a curious expression on their faces that quickly changed into horror. I looked at both of them and then back at the house. It stood silent and dark in the night, as though no one had even bothered it. No one spoke.